All right. So, Peter, I'm going to talk to you. I know that there was something that was being said, or you're going to let me know about what's going on with Bob Arum and some of the things that he's maneuvering or attempting to maneuver in regards to fighter pay and so on and so forth.
Right. All right. So I saw a story today on Boxing Scene where Bob Arum had expressed that fighters might need to start looking at lower guarantees and more upside on pay-per-views. And the thought process being that the state of boxing and the difficulty of being able to get pay-per-view numbers that could, be a place where promoters can make a profit and could operate successfully, indicating and suggesting that if they went back to a $40 per pay-per-view model, and I think he used the Hagler-Hearns example. Now, of course, that's over 30 years ago, but still using that as an example as to where there was a pay-per-view was half the amount of money that it is today. When you're looking at maybe like a $79.99, basically an $80 pay-per-view, that the fighter shouldn't be hung up on the actual guarantee, because in a lot of these pay-per-views, the fighters will be guaranteed X amount of dollars, and then they will participate on the actual pay-per-view revenue. And what Bob is suggesting is that the fighters accept a lower minimum guarantee, and operate more on the success of the pay-per-view and the upside. So I'm curious to see what you think about that. As a manager, I have my ideas about that, but I'm curious to see what you think about that, and then we can go back and forth.
I ultimately feel that a lot of people in the boxing and combat sports world, but specifically boxing, need to be open to doing business in some different ways because of what's going on in the world right now. Staying steadfast and immovable in this whole concept of this is the way it's been done, this is the way we always do it, and I think it's going to cause some people to lose opportunities and to lose money because they're too rigid in their whatever their belief is of their own personal value, whatever their belief is in their motto, what they've done for 45 years. And that could be talking about a promoter. The first part could be talking about a fighter. Everybody needs to be open to doing business in some different ways. And I even think that there's something that to be said about this concept that keeps being tossed back and forth. And even you've said it a few times. Oh, in order to do that fight, you got to have a live gate. I hear you. And I understand why you're saying that. But there are certain fights that I feel like, because of maybe the age of the fighter and maybe some other circumstances, where I think it would be better to at least have the fight than to sit up and say, well, we're going to wait until crowds can come. And that doesn't happen in a time period enough where the fight can actually realistically take place in a way that is even believable. So I do think even in that standpoint, there is some room for some movement there that isn't currently being shown. But from a fighter standpoint, I think, and I said this to Lou DiBella when he was on the show with us, I think that there are going to be some guys who are willing to step up and fight in some ways, who have a great platform for which to endear themselves to boxing fans. And I think it will create an indelible image in the minds of certain fight fans that are like, you know what, during quarantine, when whatever was going on, this dude stepped up and he was willing to fight, and he made sure that he made a point of telling the fans, he made a point of letting everybody know, hey, I'm doing this to entertain people. There's people at home who need a break, who need some sort of escape. And we get an opportunity to get out here and provide that escape for people. And I don't take that lightly. There's going to be somebody who's connected enough and, not tone deaf, and will understand that, man, I got a great opportunity. And maybe at the end of the day, I'm a C class or B class fighter, but I may be able to position myself. I'll give you an example. Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward are they were not great fighters from a talent standpoint. Not great. Like, they were good fighters. They weren't great fighters. But their trilogy, their program came along at a right time, and it delivered the kind of action that just grabbed people. So much to the point where their series has made it appear to boxing fans who are not as analytical or as critical, it has made it appear as those two guys were actually better fighters than they actually were, because of how legendary and iconic that series was. So I think that there's a lot to be said for taking advantage of a moment. And I think right now, this situation, this quarantine is creating a moment for somebody. And I'm waiting to see who's going to grab it.
I mean, that's a lot to take in right there. I mean,
I'm not going to go Michael Scott.
I mean, that's like,
I'm not going to go Michael Scott.
Listen, the Blue Angels just flew over my house.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And they went all the way from Homestead to Boca Raton. They came back and looped around. That's what I feel like this whole thing just did.
Yes. Yes.
So I will say this. Fighters understand right now that there are going to be some adjustments.
Yeah.
Because gate revenue does matter. Mm-hmm. Now, on some shows, it could be a very small gate revenue. Mm-hmm. On other shows, it could be a large gate revenue. Promoters use some of that, depending on the show, to offset costs. You better believe on a Wilder Fury 2, every bit of that $17 million went in to pay those fighters. With the pay-per-view, where the promoters were relying on making the remainder of that money on the profit. So I would say yes, there are some instances where fighters should make should acquiesce a little bit, but the promoter's still promoting the fights under different circumstances. Really, what they're losing out on is the gate revenue. What the fighters are doing is still the same. So now what you're doing is the fighters still fighting the same fight for less money, taking the same risk, but doing it for less money. And I would say that, okay, fine. You know what? All my guys know that that's what's to be expected. And they know that the guys that get the phone call and are ready and could be prepared in 4 weeks, as opposed to maybe a 6 or 7 or 8 week camp, are going to be the guys that get the call and fight on television. And I would say that that's okay. As long as when things resume back to normal, the market adjusts. Right. But if they start coming back, meeting the promoters, and say, well, you got this in the last fight, that's not going to fly. The market, there's going to have to be a market correction once fans start to sell arenas back out. So in the short term, I think everybody in what's best for the sport to move forward will make some adjustments, because we know the promoters are. We know that they don't have to put on shows, but they are going to put on shows, and they are going to give up a chunk of revenue. So the fighters understand that. And so to your point, sure, some people can step up. I don't know if a world title fight that would normally sell out a Madison Square Garden or MGM Grand is for this model, simply for the enjoyment of the fans, when the fighter that loses could not maybe have a pathway back, and this could have been a way to create some financial security. I understand people not wanting to do that. But for some of the smaller fights that are still competitive and important, like, let's be real, there are world title fights that can't draw more than 3,000 people.
You know, here's where I wonder, right? And I'm certainly not dismissing the relevancy or the importance of gate revenue. But what I'm saying is, all of these promoters, and if a fighter has a really strong manager, of course, there's analytics, there's numbers that are pulled to say, okay, here's my percentage of my take that comes from live gate. All right. So you estimate, you talk to different people and say, okay, what similar fights in history, how much money how much money has been generated from live gate for this fight, and you're trying to find the comps. So you say, okay, well, this is whatever, so-and-so took home from here, this is whatever. So then at that point, you then start to try to explore other avenues. And you say, what is the best way, non-conventional, because we're in a non-conventional situation. What's the best non-conventional way to try to make up as much of what I would have gotten from a live gate that I can do that may break the mold in terms of, because we're in a broken mold type of a society and situation right now because of this pandemic. What is it that can be done? Like, I remember, I forget which company it was. I know you remember when Bernard Hopkins came out with the
Golden Palace
on his back.
Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
The first time I saw that, I was like, whoa, I said, this is insane. What is going on? But Bernard
caught HBO off guard.
Yeah, Bernard took a payday home for that,
Yes.
And obviously, I'm not going to suggest that him putting Golden Palace on his back was the equivalent of live gate, what somebody would get from a live gate. What I'm saying is, it is now time to start to try to break the mold in regards to how you can generate revenue. And because you can prepare for a show, because you can outfit in a venue however you want to do it, and you're knowing that you're doing this in a broadcast, sort of a studio type of format. Now I got to stop thinking like a boxing promoter from 1970, 1980, 1990 to 2000s, early 2000s. I got to stop thinking like that. I got to start thinking like a television production show. What are all the ways that I can try to make up this live gate? And I'm not sure, from what I'm hearing from boxing people, if those conversations are being had. So I think that, like I said, I think Bob's correct. I do think that fighters need to be more open-minded and be willing to do some things that maybe they wouldn't have done in the past. But I also think that promoters and networks also need to be looking at the same type of thing. So,
but isn't it all relative? If you're dropping the pay-per-view price, then how's the fighter really? It only works if you're giving them if you're lowering the guarantee and then dropping the pay-per-view price. The only thing is you have to give them a higher percentage.
Yeah, I'm not really speaking specifically to what Bob's suggestion was, because I'm not saying that necessarily is the answer, but I'm saying conceptually, fighters being open-minded to taking some things that would have traditionally meant less.
And remember what I'm saying to you. I get it. I totally get what you're saying.
Right.
And I always cut you off.
It's okay. It's like you're like a bad driver.
But the fighters never take less risk. Just keep that in mind.
Never take less risk.
They never take less risk, ever. But the risk is the same.
They're in the business of taking risk, and the same. It's all about accepting your current situation, right? So a fighter getting into a ring at in the 11th fight of his career. Okay, perfect example. Floyd fought Oscar. He knew when he fought Oscar, he was the B side. Oscar was the A side at that time.
Really?
Probably the last time ever Floyd's ever been a B side. Probably the last time ever. Yeah,
B side from an odds perspective?
No, from
promotional perspective.
Promotional, who gets the most? Oscar was a bigger star at that time.
I mean, wasn't Oscar kind of on his way out?
He may have been on his way out from a skill standpoint, but at that time, like even Floyd said it. He said, Floyd said, I know I was a B side, and I bet on myself. I took that fight, and I said to myself, this is the last time I'll ever be a B side.
Okay.
So to me, that was almost an acknowledgement that he took less money. Okay. And he knew Oscar was getting paid more.
All right.
And he was okay with that because his whole thing was, Top Rank he felt like Top Rank chose Oscar over him as the guy to push. And that was one of the main reasons why he wanted to separate from Top Rank. This is the story that he's told. Okay. That Bob's machine was behind Oscar at the time. Okay. And that, that whole thing with the HBO and all that was the story he told. So I use that reference to say,
I mean, rightfully so at the time.
Oh yeah, for sure. At the time, it made sense. And it made sense for Floyd to bet on himself if he believed that much in himself that he could become this.
Floyd bought out his contract. We're digressing, but he bought out his contract. But that's a whole other topic.
Yes, he bought it. So yeah, but my point is, he had to accept who and what he was and what the situation was at the time. And he didn't take less risk for fighting Oscar De La Hoya than he has when he's had any of the fights when he's been the A side. But there is an acceptance of what is attainable at the time based off of the circumstances. And sometimes you have to take less because that's all that is attainable. You can't say, hey, well, my risk is the same as it was, last month. Well, last month there was $100 million to pay you. This month there's only 50 million. So do you want your share of the 50 million, or do you want to sit up and say, I'm not taking less risk and get none of it?
Right.
So
I get it. Look, I mean, the people that are willing to roll the dice and understand short-term loss, long-term gain have a better chance of ingratiating themselves to the fans and coming out of this at the end on the better side of it.
Right. But that's just kind of where I'm thinking with that. But it is what it is.